when we look at the decimation of American wildlife, that story begins with the Colonials. Daniel Boone and later Davy Crockett, they were market hunters. Crockett was a commercial bear hunter. Crockett would hire on to shoot meat to feed the soldiers. Boone is also a poacher. These colonists like Boone realize they can make a lot of money going into the Indian territories and hunting deer skins and literally kill everything. They killed the last 15 million buffalo.
Jeez.
Sold them all. That becomes the American tale.
Let's move into the history of hunting.
Yeah.
In America.
In the U.S.?
Yeah.
First off, it's, people who hunted in the U.S., I mean, there's people debate the number, but somewhere between, there's people definitely here hunting 13, 14,000 years ago. People were maybe here hunting as much as 20,000 years ago. People that came from Siberia, passed into Alaska very quickly, at some point by 13,000 years ago, it exploded across the landscape, and those were hunting cultures. Only later, right, many thousands of years later, Europeans started to come, and that's kind of where I'm very interested in native hunting practices. But kind of when we look at the decimation of American wildlife, that story begins with the Colonials, right, coming in. Mm-hmm. Just to get a little extra detail there is an argument there's a very powerful argument. It's not settled science, but there's a very powerful argument that when humans arrived here, they wiped out many species of wildlife. I'm talking the first Americans, Siberian immigrants. They wiped out many species of wildlife. People debate it, but to me, it's verging on settled science that humans had were a huge contributing factor into extinction of mammoths, mastodons, short-faced bears, giant ground sloths, a host of things, 9 genera of animals kind of blinked out around the time humans arrived. But then they had this huge period of, the historian Dan Flores calls it Native America. They had this 10,000 year period, 10,000 years of hunting in America had the ensuing 10,000 years of hunting in America had one extinction, a flightless bird on the Pacific coast. People hit harmony. People hit where we weren't driving shit to extinction for 10,000 years on this continent. And then boom, Europeans show up and that story shifts, right? To get into kind of just give you a little bit about the first hunter, if people that are loosely familiar with American history will recognize the name Daniel Boone, no doubt. I mean, we're kind of in Boone country right now, let's take a look at Boone for a minute. So Boone's people came from England. At the time in England, you weren't going to hunt, right? The king owned the deer. There was no sort of public hunting. Wildlife was jealously guarded by the elites. Hunting wasn't a thing. Boone's family comes here, and all of a sudden, there's this rich wildlife resource out there, and they pick up hunting. These are not hunters coming to America. These are very much non-hunter. The European colonists that come over are they're not showing up as hunters. They're getting here and they're learning from natives how to utilize these resources. And Boone is this interesting figure because he sits right at the beginning of colonial history, or he sits right at the beginning of the American experiment. He, in the years prior to the American Revolution, Boone becomes a deerskin hunter. During the colonial period, Boone is also a interloper. He's a poacher in 2 ways. Boone he's living in these settlements. First, he lives in Pennsylvania. Then he's down in the Yadkin Valley in North Carolina. He's forbidden for 2 reasons from hunting where he hunts. The British, the colonial British, don't want American colonists who they view as the frontier people they view as the worst of the worst. Hillbilly rednecks are these American colonists out on the frontier, right? They question their allegiance, and they don't want them crossing the Appalachian Mountains and hunting in native land because it causes so much trouble with the Native Americans. The British were somewhat friendly were somewhat better than the Americans became at like dealing with native relations. So the British would say, you're not allowed to go over there. And then it also violated native law, where the natives claim these areas, okay, the Cherokee, the Shawnee, like they claim these areas as their hunting grounds. But these colonists like Boone realize they can make a lot of money going into the Indian territories and hunting deer skins, which they're forbidden, the British forbid them from doing it. The Indians forbid them from doing it, but that's their biz. So like Boone going through the Cumberland Gap, the first time he went through the Cumberland Gap, he's looking for deer skins. And these guys have no cash economy. You raise crops, a family raises crops, the family uses 90% of those crops. The only access you have to cash is you might sell a small amount of corn or whatever, but all of a sudden they have access to a cash economy because they can kill whitetails. And we see then this deer hunting era, late 1760s into the 1770s, we see this phenomenon that we're going to see again and again and again, where these guys like with a commodity, whitetail deer, we see that they're able to like wipe places clean. They're able to go into an area and literally kill everything. And what do you do when that happens? Go further down the trail and literally kill everything. And from that point, we start seeing this de-wilding of America from commodity hunting, from commercial hunting. And man, I got nothing but respect for Boone. Like I've done projects on Boone, studied Boone, phenomenal woodsman, but that becomes the American tale is deregulation, commodification, and all of a sudden you just realize that this inexhaustible resource we have, we just eat it. We just consume it from one end of the country to the other.
Damn.
And you've heard of Jim Bridger, like the Mountain Men era. I mean, they pretty much wiped beaver out in the Rocky Mountains. The buffalo hide, I just finished a project on the buffalo hide hunters. The buffalo hide hunters from the end of the Civil War to 1883, they killed the last 15 million buffalo.
Jeez.
Sold them all. $2.50 a piece, $2.50 a piece. And it's like, so when people, it's funny because, I tend to be in many aspects, I tend to be like right leaning. And then you hear like deregulation. And I'm always like, yeah, in some areas, sure. But in some areas, we've caused a lot of trouble. Like deregulation has caused a lot of trouble with American wildlife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did we start to see a turn?
Late 1800s, early 1900s. The name that comes up often is Theodore Roosevelt was instrumental in this. By that point, you start seeing. By that point, the first thing you start seeing is bans on selling wild meat in cities, like New York. Like, have you ever heard of the Boone and Crockett Club?
No.
Okay, like Theodore Roosevelt was the first president of the Boone and Crockett Club. When people talk about, you ever hear someone's kill a buck and they say it was a 180-inch whitetail? What they're usually talking about is a scoring system developed by the Boone and Crockett scoring system. It's a way to measure a deer's skull or measure a deer's antler growth. Boone and Crockett Club, all these other organizations start out and they start trying to regulate harvest. And they'll come in and say, like in New York City, there'd be a ban on selling certain wild meats. And then they come up with a thing called the Lacey Act, which gave it some teeth, where anytime you break a state's law and cross a state line, it becomes a federal problem. Because you could have states, when they're trying to save wildlife, a state might come in and say, no more market hunting, you can't kill ducks. You can't kill ducks with punt guns anymore and sell it, but they don't enforce it. So then with the Lacey Act, it became like, if you're down you're in Chesapeake Bay and you're commercially killing ducks with a punt gun, but then you take them to New York and sell them, you now have a federal violation.
Gotcha.
And so that is when they were really able to start curbing the market hunters. There's a great irony with calling the Boone and Crockett Club, because it takes its name from Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. The Boone and Crockett Club and people that came out of that organization, that influenced that organization, was instrumental in wiping out the wildlife markets. But Daniel Boone and later Davy Crockett, they were market hunters. So there's a kind of irony in the name. Like we associate Boone and Crockett, like Crockett was a commercial bear hunter, and became a congressman, but he was a commercial black bear hunter. And he also had military contracts. When there was a military campaign during the Indian Wars, Crockett would hire on to shoot meat to feed the soldiers.
Interesting.
That was one of Crockett's early occupations, is like feeding a marching army.
Wow.
You know,
I did not know that.
kill enough shit for everybody to eat. That was his job.
Right on, man. Right on.
Yeah, he was a badass too. Not he wasn't a badass like Boone, but Crockett was a badass. You know, not like Boone, but you know.
What made Boone more badass?
There's one time Boone went over. There's one point where Boone goes into Kentucky and goes there with some guys, a handful of guys. They run into a bunch of trouble with Indians. They get all their shit stolen. One of them gets killed. Okay. Eventually, one of Boone's hunting partners, like his brother and stuff, like they leave and go home. Boone stays by himself. Some accounts suggest that he's there so long he needs to make his own gunpowder with using wood ash, bat guano, and sulfur deposits. Right. Stays there 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, stays in the woods 2 years, much of it by himself. Builds up a big builds up a big pile of hides. Twice gets them stolen from him, or seized, I should be a better word for it, seized by the natives. And just hangs out 2 years. He was like, he loved being in the woods, man. You know, Boone was a badass. And it came at a great cost. Like there was always these conflicts on the colonial frontier. Boone was next to one of his kids when he was killed in Indian fighting. Another one of Boone's sons was killed in Indian fighting. A brother of his was killed. Brother-in-law was killed. Many, I mean, you know, many people in his family all like gave their lives. I don't know if that's the right word. Made enormous sacrifices to live that lifestyle. Very dangerous lifestyle at that time because there was active warfare.
Yeah.
In the colonial areas, and and Boone, I mean, he just was hooked. He couldn't picture living another way.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.